Hello, and welcome back. In the article, Radical Approach to the Climate Crisis, Christian Parenti argues that there are two broad ways of tackling the climate crisis now: mitigation and adaptation. To fully understand and comprehend his argument, one must come to understand the two terms. Mitigation, simply put, is the reduction in climate change. It heavily involves reducing the flow of heat-trapping greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Parenti defines mitigation in the form of solutions, saying mitigation means drastically cutting our production of CO2 levels and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, moving towards clean, green energy sources, closing coal-fired power plants, weaning our economy off of fossil fuels, building a smart electrical grid, and making massive investments in carbon capture and sequestration technologies. Adaptation in this context basically means adjusting to life in a changing climate, be it actual or an expected future. As Christian Parenti puts it, adaptation means preparing to live with the effects of climate change, some of which are already underway and some of which are inevitable. Parenti goes further by categorizing adaptation into two challenges: political and technical. Technical adaptation, according to the author, is the transformation of human relationship to non-human nature, as nature itself transforms. Examples provided to the reader include building seawalls around vulnerable coastal cities. Examples of New Orleans and Florida, even the Netherlands. Giving land back to mangroves and Everglades in California so they can act to break tidal surges during giant storms. Opening wildlife migration corridors so that animals and all types of species can move away from the equator as the climate gets warmer. And developing sustainable agricultural that can function on an industrial scale, even as weather patterns gyrate wildly. Political adaptation, on the other hand, is described to the reader as the transformation of social relations in the context of devising new ways to continue and de-escalate the unavoidable violence that has and will erupt from climate change. Solutions involved progressive economic redistribution, sustainable forms of development, and a new diplomacy of peace building. While I wholeheartedly agree with Parenti, as I myself idolize these solutions and am gripped with the problem that they will solve, I feel that human greed and lust for power will outmatch the logic of survival and sabotage any hope and all time we have left to implement these strategies and save this planet. Now, I acknowledge that my view has a more morbid and pessimistic tone, but before you dismiss it as some rant from a lost soul, Please observe the nature of this nation. There is a huge gap in wealth classes, with so many below the poverty line and almost all of the remaining barely breathing above it. The minuscule few left are riddled with enough wealth to end poverty in its entirety. The quality of care in this nation has, for its people, is always and almost non-existent. If I dare say, just enough to prevent receiving the charge of murder. As I write this, as I speak, more than half of all Americans are in some form of debt. A significant portion is in medical bills. I myself have been recently slapped with a $3,000 plus medical bill for my last transfusion, as a result from the government cutting off my medical insurance during a major medically related shutdown. The gravity of this is that my life is in jeopardy. And any wrong move can be my last. I asked the question, when presented the facts about the intentions of this nation, is it so hard to imagine that its people would be deemed necessary casualties in the battle for money and power? In this essay that Parenti wrote, he gave another form of adaptation that I feel rings true to our fate: the armed lifeboat. This form of adaptation describes what is already present in our nation. Our nation, and through conditioning, many of our fellow Americans, as Parenti puts it, responds to climate change by arming, excluding, forgetting, repressing, policing, and killing. As grave as this sounds and as wrong as we wish it to be, examples begin to flood through the mind. Katrina, the killing of unarmed Black people by police. Political, religious, and racial divisions. Hiding or outright dismissing the facts. Even legislatively, the U.S. failed in its progress. We have no carbon tax or any real program of investment in clean tech. Parenti describes the U.S. as the intransigence of the international effort to cut emissions. The intransigence. Ultimately, we have the solutions, strategies, and even the technology required to solve the climate crisis. However, we are the Ouroboros. And just as it was in the past, we will meet our demise at our own hand.